In the dark pages of European history, where ambition and betrayal are intertwined, there is rarely such a devastating story. The tale of a queen imprisoned not by her enemies, but by her own family. There is a secret under every stone, a story behind every shadow. In this video, we will explore them together. Don't forget to share where you are watching from in the comments. This is not a narrative confined to medieval dungeons or the brutality of foreign wars. It is far more chilling because everything was done under the mask of love, family, and duty. Joanna of Castile, the woman known to history as Joanna the Mad, was not accused of insanity by doctors. The ones who affixed that label were those who feared her power, her own father, her husband, and her son. Her true crime was not madness. It was the audacity to rightfully claim one of Europe's most powerful thrones. For nearly 50 years, Joanna was forced to watch as her freedom, her inheritance, and her identity were stripped away by the people closest to her. When she was born in 1479, she entered a world dominated by ambition and ruthless strategy. Her parents were Isabella I and Ferdinand II, the Catholic monarchs who unified Spain and drove the Muslims from Granada. But in the court, children were valuable not for themselves, but as pawns on the political chessboard. What makes Joanna's story even more chilling is not just the cruelty she endured, but the calculated and systematic way it was inflicted. This was not the barbarity of a whip-wielding tyrant. This was psychological warfare, legal manipulation, and propaganda. It was a system of control that dictators in future centuries would master. The castle of Tordesillas, where Joanna spent her final years, still stands today. It is a silent monument, walls that bore witness to one of royal history's most brutal betrayals. Here, a queen destined to rule an empire was reduced to a state of being a captive, silenced, and broken. The truth, however, did not completely vanish. Secret documents from the period suggest that Joanna was never truly insane. Perhaps she was the only sane person there, while her power-drunk family was ready to sacrifice everything to secure their own bloodline. This is the story of a queen's captivity, a daughter becoming a political burden, a mother made invisible, and a truth concealed for centuries. The most dangerous monsters are not always foreigners. Sometimes the cruelest ones are the people we call family. To fully understand Joanna's story, one must return to the late 1400s in Spain. Spain at that time was a kingdom shaped by wars and conquests, triumphant, ambitious, and at the same time tightly bound to paranoia and a rigid hierarchy. Royal marriages were born not of love, but of strategy. Children were raised not to be loved, but as instruments trained for the sake of the state's interests. Joanna's parents, Isabella and Ferdinand, were masterful strategists. Their marriage was a political success, but its emotional foundation was built on calculation and self-interest. To them, love was a weakness, and this cold logic was passed down to their children. From the moment Joanna was born, she was not seen as a daughter, but as a diplomatic asset. Her value was measured not in affection, but in alliances. In the same years, Spain was undergoing a massive transformation. The Reconquista ended with the conquest of Granada in 1492, completely removing Muslim rule from the Iberian Peninsula. In the same year, Columbus discovered the New World in the name of Spain. The country was intoxicated with triumph, and tolerance for difference and dissent was rapidly diminishing. Loyalty superseded everything. Even family ties were secondary. Joanna's education reflected these harsh realities. While learning skills befitting a queen, such as music, foreign languages, and court etiquette, she was also taught the ruthless nature of power games. Treaties were temporary, alliances fickle, and family ties were seen as expendable when they clashed with self-interest. These lessons, sadly, would become the painful realities of her life. The Castilian court was filled with intrigue and betrayal. Bribes, conspiracies, and deception were commonplace. Trust was a luxury and a risk equivalent to death. Joanna learned early on to guard her thoughts and emotions. Ironically, This cautiousness and prudence would later be presented as evidence of her madness. As she grew older, Joanna displayed a sharp, inquisitive, and independent mind. Qualities that would bring praise in a son were seen as danger in a daughter. She challenged her tutors, asked bold questions about politics, and showed an interest in governance. For Isabella and Ferdinand, this was frightening. A queen should be obedient, not opinionated. When she began to express her own opinions, especially when conflicting with her parents, these behaviors were recorded not as youthful assertiveness, but as symptoms of insanity. In 1496, when Joanna was only 17, her parents announced her marriage to Philip of Habsburg. Philip, the heir to the Netherlands and the Holy Roman Empire, was handsome and charismatic. Courts boasted of him. But behind the facade was a selfish, cunning, and cruel man. He wanted a pawn, not a partner, and Joanna was his pawn. Her journey to the Netherlands, surrounded by courtly splendor and hope, would be her last taste of true freedom. Their wedding was a lavish celebration marking the spectacular union of two great dynasties. Joanna wore elegant Spanish silks, and Philip shone with Habsburg splendor. On the surface, it was a fairy tale, but tragedy lurked behind the curtain. Philip's goal was clear: power, fortune, and control. Joanna's voice, opinions, or happiness did not matter to him. Initially, Joanna was deeply in love with him. This devotion would later be used to portray her as unstable. The queen's passion was viewed as a dangerous instability in court protocol. At first, everything seemed fine. Joanna adapted to Dutch life, learned the customs, bore their first child, Eleanor, in 1498, and prepared for rule. But Philip had already begun a calculated campaign of destruction. He cheated openly, displayed his mistresses, and ensured Joanna was aware of every betrayal. This was not just personal cruelty, it was a political strategy. A humiliated and heartbroken wife could be more easily broken. The whispers of the court spread. Joanna's human reactions, the natural emotions of betrayed spouse, were relabeled as hysterical and unbalanced. The threads of the trap were tightening, and Philip was only at the beginning. His strategy of control did not rely on brute force. It was much more subtle and dangerous. He alternated coldness and affection to destabilize Joanna emotionally, isolated her from court affairs, and placed his own allies around her. These individuals fed Joanna false information, led her to question her decisions, and eroded her self-confidence. The world around her had turned into a theater consisting of silent whispers, staged betrayals, and constant surveillance. Every movement, every emotional reaction was framed in the eyes of observers as the actions of a woman whose sanity was in question. When Joanna cried, yelled, or demanded respect, these reactions were interpreted as proof of her madness. Even her own children became weapons in Philip's plan. Between 1498 and 1507, she had 6 children: Eleanor, Charles, Isabella, Ferdinand, Mary, and Catherine. Under normal circumstances, these children should have solidified her power as queen and mother. But Philip used them as tools for manipulation. He controlled Joanna's behavior by threatening to separate her from them and bound their children's loyalty to him instead of Joanna. Observers outside Philip's circle noticed that Joanna strangely only reacted to specific provocations: Philip's infidelities, his psychological games, and his humiliations. But when dealing with matters of governance or intellectual discussions, she was calm, logical, and highly capable. This behavioral pattern sparked quiet doubts about her sanity. But the rumors spread quickly. They were whispered in court corridors, echoed in diplomatic correspondence, and recounted repeatedly in royal courts across Europe. By 1504, these rumors had taken on a life of their own. Joanna's reputation was sealed. Even people who had never met her accepted the idea that she was unfit to rule. And this was exactly what Philip wanted. However, an unexpected political opportunity arose. Joanna's mother, Queen Isabella, passed away that year. Isabella's death required Joanna's accession to the throne as Queen of Castile. This was the moment she had been prepared for since childhood, and her mother's will clearly name Joanna as the legal heir. But there was a trap, a clause that would be a perfect tool for her political enemies. Isabella's will stipulated that if Joanna was found unable or unwilling to govern, her father, Ferdinand, would serve as the regent of Castile. It was likely written as a precaution, not an accusation. But in the hands of Ferdinand and Philip, this clause turned into a weapon. The concept of unable was exaggerated, and every tear, argument, and emotional moment was interpreted as proof of her incapacity. Ferdinand immediately revealed his ambitions. Instead of supporting his daughter, he took swift steps to regain control over Castile. He reignited the rumors about Joanna's sanity, portraying her as hysterical and irrational, arguing she was unfit to rule. Joanna's grief following Isabella's death and her anger over Philip's ongoing betrayal were reinterpreted as signs of dangerous instability. Philip saw his chance and proclaimed himself Philip the First of Castile, claiming the crown through his wife's right. But Joanna, despite all the manipulation she had endured, did not surrender her birthright. She resisted, and in the twisted logic of the court, this resistance was presented as proof of her madness. For the rationale was, if she were truly sane, why would she not simply hand over power to her father or husband? It was a classic no-win situation. If she asserted her authority, she was mad. If she remained silent, she was incompetent. Every move she made tightened the traps set by the court. The simple truth underlying all these events was that neither Ferdinand nor Philip wanted a woman ruler with genuine power. And European leaders watching the crisis in Spain recognized it. A convenient example of how to sideline a woman whose authority threatened the existing order. In the shadows of the court, a massive propaganda machine began to work quietly. Rumors detailing Joanna's behavior spread quickly, slowly, like a fire, unstoppable. It was alleged that she refused to eat, slept on the floor, and wandered aimlessly for hours. Some of it might have been true. She was in mourning and under constant pressure. But most was exaggerated or completely fabricated. The gossip grew so powerful that the fiction was eventually accepted as fact. In 1506, everything changed once again. Philip the Handsome died suddenly and young. The official cause of death was recorded as typhoid, but rumors of poisoning immediately circulated. This could have been an opportunity for Joanna to regain her voice. But it wasn't. Instead, her fate was sealed. Her intense grief reaction to Philip's death, clinging to his corpse and the long journey with the coffin to Granada, was presented as the final proof of her madness. Writers of the time claimed Joanna opened the coffin at night and kissed her dead husband's face. The stories grew more sensational with every retelling. A woman devastated by the death of her manipulative spouse became, in the legends, a queen who had broken from reality. But the truth was not nearly so sensational. Yes, she grieved. And yes, she likely insisted on traveling with the body, partly out of devotion and partly out of fear that Philip's allies would steal the body and organize a funeral that would manipulate public perception. In another context, this might have been seen as honorable behavior. But in the court narrative, it was interpreted as insanity. Ferdinand wasted no time. He stepped in as the protector of his daughter and the kingdom. The regency, once defined as temporary, was made indefinite. Although legally queen, Joanna was now a powerless figure, merely a symbolic queen. Her father's control over Castile was absolute. Foreign powers, who had previously negotiated directly with her, now sent their letters to her unfortunate daughter, Joanna. She was removed from the court. Her access to decision-making processes was cut off. Even attempting to govern or appear in public was interpreted as madness. If she acted like a queen, it was because she believed she was still queen, and this was labeled as madness by the court. Every action she took was evaluated through the lens of mental illness. If she showed sadness, it was deemed pathological. If she showed strength, it was considered dangerous. If she did nothing, it was interpreted as surrender. There was no escape. The most tragic aspect is that the image of Joanna as the Mad Queen still dominates the historical narrative. For generations, academics repeated the story that she was an emotionally unstable queen, unfit to rule due to an obsessive love. But modern research paints a different picture. A thinking, feeling woman systematically destroyed by a patriarchal mechanism, and a queen punished for daring to exercise the authority she was born to possess. The place chosen for Joanna's silent disappearance was the remote and cold castle of Tordesillas, on the banks of the Duero River. Damp, isolated, and far from politics, the stone walls of this castle were the perfect place to extinguish the queen who had once been prepared to govern a vast empire. She was now separated from her children, stripped of her dignity, and held under 24-hour surveillance. It was not officially a prison, but in every important respect, it was. She was not allowed to travel, could not communicate freely, and the attendants accompanying her were constantly changed so that no one could develop loyalty to her. Those who would report her words and actions were carefully selected. As the years progressed, her world narrowed significantly. Her days became a pattern of prayer, silence, and looking out through iron bars. But this isolation did not completely extinguish Joanna. Foreign envoys and some empathetic Spanish courtiers who saw her at Tordesillas reported that she was still attentive, articulate, and aware of her surroundings. Philosophy, affairs of state, and the welfare of her children still interested her. These moments of clarity were ignored by those in power. They did not fit the narrative, for they had to maintain the mask of her madness. When Ferdinand died in 1516, Joanna might have been expected to gain some freedom. After all, she was still technically the rightful queen. But by then, her political value had been entirely transferred to her son, Charles. Charles was only 16 and had been raised under the supervision of the Habsburg court, taught to view Spain as his inheritance. Joanna's desire to rule on her own, or even as co-queen, was considered impractical at best, dangerous at worst. Thus, the cycle of betrayal continued. In 1517, Charles arrived in Spain, setting foot in the country his mother was born to govern. Among his first acts was a visit to Joanna at Tordesillas. The meeting took place under tight security and was politically staged. According to daily records, Joanna welcomed him warmly, recognized him immediately, embraced him, and asked about his health and education. There was no madness or break from reality. Only a mother seeing her son after many years. But Charles had already made up his mind from the meeting. His mother would remain where she was. Some historians believe this was for political expediency, for a young ruler still consolidating power. Freeing Joanna could lead to chaos. Loyal supporters might rally around his mother, even questioning his own legitimacy. The easiest path was to leave her at Tordesillas, kept under surveillance with selected guards and fluctuating personnel who only reported to the crown. And so, the door remained closed for nearly 4 more decades. As the years passed, Joanna completely disappeared from public view. Her name was no longer mentioned in court announcements, her signature removed from royal decrees. She was never officially deposed, never formally diagnosed, never given a right to defense. In the eyes of power, she had ceased to exist. But despite this forced invisibility, Joanna remained a symbol. Rumors persisted among the Spanish people. Some whispered she was unjustly imprisoned. Others recounted that she still prayed daily for her chance to ascend the throne. Peasants around Tordesillas referred to her not mockingly, but with silent respect, as Queen Lena. As she aged, her health deteriorated. She battled arthritis, chronic pain, and increasing frailty. But those who saw her rarely noted that her mind was still sharp. Even in her 70s, she recalled details of politics, history, and faith with clarity. But the outside world had already moved on. In 1555, after 46 years of captivity, Joanna of Castile passed away quietly at the age of 75. There were no grand funeral rites or royal declarations of mourning. Her body was interred in the royal chapel in Granada, next to the man who had orchestrated her downfall, Philip. It was a bitter irony. In death, she was reunited with the man who had arranged the beginning of her collapse. History would remember her by a name she never wanted, Joanna the Mad. This label, whispered to justify political machinations, became the entire summary of her existence. For centuries, textbooks presented her as a tragic footnote, an emotionally unstable queen unfit to rule. But in recent years, historians have begun to re-examine the story. Not a story of madness, but a story of a woman trapped by power, betrayed by her family, and denied the right to exercise the authority she was born with. Viewed through the lens of modern psychology and politics, her alleged madness looks less like illness and more like grief, ambition, and pain over a lost inheritance. She grieved for her stolen legacy, for her children being raised to view her with suspicion, for the crown she was never allowed to wear. Joanna was not mad. She was isolated, manipulated, and systematically broken. The effort to label her insane was a tool used to limit the power of a woman who was feared. The story of a capable and ambitious woman in a world that expected obedience or silence. The legacy of Joanna's imprisonment offers a chilling lesson even today. The tools used against her, gaslighting, discrediting, isolation, rewriting the truth, are still being employed. If not by kings, then by institutions, governments, and families that prioritize control over compassion. Her story is not merely one of a dark royal period. It holds a mirror up to power, patriarchy, and the silent violence behind the mask of care. Joanna was born a queen, she died a prisoner. But her truth was stronger than the lies that buried her. And finally, her voice is being heard.